Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us tonight from wherever you are in the country. So whether that's 8 p.m. here on the East Coast or 5 p.m. over on the West Coast, welcome. And thank you so much for joining us for Make Love, Not War, exploring the human impacts of our nuclear system. I am so excited and honored tonight to be joined by a really amazing panel of activists and general good humans from around the country who are fighting every day to make sure that folks who've been impacted by our nuclear system get the compensation and recognition that they deserve. So tonight, my name is Yasmin Silva. I'll be our moderator, but I'm gonna try and kind of take a back seat because we have a wealth of knowledge and stories for you tonight to talk about how the nuclear system impacts folks here at home in the US. So I will be kind of turning the reins over to our panelists a bit. I'll pop in here and there, and then I'll be back to moderate our question and answer section because we want all of you to be able to ask the questions that you have. This is really a dialogue and a wealth of knowledge passing intergenerationally. So I'll do a very brief bio of each speaker just to give you a taste, and then I'll let them fill that out themselves. So joining us from Utah, we have playwright, journalist, activist, and writer, Mary Dickson. She's a downwinder who's spent decades writing and speaking about the human cost of US nuclear testing. Next, we have Keith Kiefer, who is the national commander at the National Association of Atomic Veterans. Keith was a veteran deployed to Eniwetok Atoll to clean up the radiation from numerous nuclear tests that the United States conducted there. We have Susan Gordon, who is the coordinator for the Multicultural Alliance for a Safe Environment. She has over 3 decades of grassroots organizing experience with impacted community groups around the nuclear weapons complex, and she was previously the director of the Alliance for Nuclear Accountability. And last but certainly not least, we have Larry King, a Dene activist who has lived his entire 63 plus years in the community of Church Rock chapter Navajo Nation. He worked for United Nuclear Corporation, Northeast Church Rock Mine, for almost 10 years before getting laid off when the mine was closed. Larry witnessed the infamous UNC mail tilling spill in 1979, which is the largest mill tailing spill in US history. So I'm really excited to hear from each of you. And again, I will let you fill in way more of the color than I did. I just sketched out some very brief lines. So first, a question that I pose to all of you, because I think that you each approach this because of your geography and theory of change, you each approach this in a bit of a different way. I'm curious how you first found out that nuclear weapons activities were affecting you or your community, and kind of how that made you feel, or we'll get into it a little later, but what action that spurred you on to take. I will turn it over to Susan if you feel comfortable starting with that.
Sure, thanks so much. I'm really happy to be part of the webinar this evening and have this opportunity to talk about what I view as really important work. So I, as a young mother, was living on the Oregon coast in the late 1970s. And at that point, the US government was preparing for surviving nuclear war. And they were through the Federal Emergency Management Agency, FEMA, which we hear about during disasters. But FEMA was actually doing exercises to prepare communities for surviving a nuclear war. And in the little community that I lived in, we were being targeted as first we were targeted because Coos Bay is the deepest water draft between the Columbia River and San Francisco. So if there was going to be another place where big boats, big ships could come in, it was going to be Coos Bay. And then as the preparedness drills were happening, they were were saying basically that everyone from Eugene, from the central part of the state, which the military targeted as a place to drop a bomb, they would be coming to Coos Bay. Well, we were telling them that doesn't make sense, because we're going to be bombed first too. So that's when I first started getting involved. It's like, how are we going to survive a nuclear war? And we're not. I mean, that's the bottom line. And so we worked with a Republican county commissioner and challenged the FEMA exercise. And it ended up that we were able to get the state of Oregon to pull out of nuclear preparedness drills. We were the first state in the country to just say, we're not going to pretend that we can, survive a nuclear war. So from there, I did a lot of local organizing across Oregon. I moved into doing national organizing and working with our Oregon legislature, and specifically Senator Mark Hatfield and Representative Mike Kopetsky. So we were able, through working with them and with DC allied organizations, to pass and secure the nuclear weapons, the nuclear test moratorium legislation, and that happened in 1993. And after that, I moved into a national position with the Alliance for Nuclear Accountability and served as their executive director for 17 years. The Alliance for Nuclear Accountability, ANA, was a network of 36 groups that were located next to the nuclear weapons complex sites, so where they were building the nuclear weapons across the country, also some of the waste sites. And we worked, well, it's great to say that the Alliance for Nuclear Accountability is still working. I was there 17 years, and as the funding situation changed, I left, and they're no longer a staffed network, but through really strong leadership among the grassroots groups that are still connected, they continue on. And they, every year until COVID, they were bringing activists to Washington, DC to lobby. And I think it's, ANA is a remarkable network of, really committed grassroots experts that have learned about the nuclear weapons complex and, are a force. After I left ANA, I came to work for the Multicultural Alliance for Safe Environment. It's also a network of 5 groups located in the western part of New Mexico. And we work primarily on uranium mining, which is the first step in the nuclear fuel chain. So the uranium miners and uranium mining is the very first thing that happens whether you're building nuclear weapons or nuclear power. And we work on cleanup issues, health issues, and trying to gain compensation through the Radiation Exposure Compensation Act. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Susan. I would love to hear from Larry next, if Larry feels comfortable. I think building off of Susan's work with uranium miners, it would be great to hear a bit about how you yourself first found out that nuclear weapons activities was affecting your community.
Good evening to all, and thank you for having me on this webcast. My name is Larry King. I am 63 years old, and how I got involved with this issue was back in 1996 when I found out some people were trying to locate me because due to the fact that the NRC had issued a license to do ISL mining to a company out of South Texas. The parent company was URI. The company that splintered off of that parent company was HRI, Hydro Resource Incorporated. And I've been hearing before 96 about a new mine that wanted to come in to Church Rock, and I didn't know what part of Church Rock in a community northeast of Gallup, New Mexico, about 12 miles north of Gallup, New Mexico, where I reside. But it was through that person that located me and told me to join a meeting that was in progress in the town of Crown Point, which was about maybe another 50 miles northeast of, as the crow flies, northeast of Gallup, New Mexico. And from that point on, that's how I found out that HRI, the company from South Texas, was planning to do a ISL mining and situ leach mining. And when I found out the area in Church Rock, I was surprised it was right in my own backyard, next to an abandoned mine, about I would say about less than 1,000 feet from where I live. And the only thing that divides my homestead with the abandoned mine is a New Mexico State Highway 566. And through this organization, which I later joined, the Eastern Navajo Diné Against Uranium Mining, NDOM, and it comprised of the founders that were from Crown Point. The founders were more knowledgeable in ISL mining type of situation, because the guy had worked in a pilot project using the ISL method in situ leach mining about 3 miles north of Crown Point, New Mexico. And he said that the process was successful in extracting the uranium from that method, but I don't know if anybody's aware of or what ISL mining is all about, but it's practically just injection of water mixed with all kinds of chemicals into an aquifer, and practically creating a toxic soup underground, stripping the uranium off of the grains of sand. And that's how they then extract the uranium up to the surface through numerous wells downstream. But he said that the person said that when it came time, around that time was when the price of uranium hit bottom, and that's when the mine closed down and had to start restoring the aquifer back to its pre-mining condition. He said they were 24/7 for about 3 years and never got even any close to the baseline that they had established. And so he was aware, and he knew what ISL mining was all about, and that's how he got involved. The organization was created, and then I joined. And because I found out that the Church Rock portion was right in my backyard and next to an abandoned mine, but there was also I practically grew up surrounded by mining activities. The abandoned mine that I'm talking about was first set up by Phillips Petroleum back in the late 50s. I was born in 57, so I knew when I was little, I used to see head frames. I didn't know what they were. Later on years, I used to hurt sheep around that area. At those times, they were not secured, no security fencing, nothing whatsoever. There was a community windmill in the midst of that uranium mine in Phillips, and the local community were hauling water from that windmill, which was only feet away from the mine shaft. And I also used to play on those small hills, bluish and grayish in colors, and later found out that they were all mine waste that used to come from underground, huge piles. And I used to play around there while my sheep were grazing about. So that was my first encounter with uranium, not knowing it was uranium and not knowing it was dangerous to me or to the community in the future. But From there on, I graduated in 1975, and right shortly after, in the fall of 1975, in October, that's when I got hired by UNC. And back in those days, that was the largest employer in our community. And I know there's several of us, a lot of us that got hired on, mostly young generation, middle age, and with no training or any type of um, safety seminars or orientation at all. We just got in and went to work, and not knowing that the being exposed to uranium and at an early age would be very detrimental to somebody's health at my age and the later in the years. And I'm at the point where I'm about let's see, what, 40 years, and it's about the time when I will be hopefully at this time I'm feeling fine, I'm feeling okay, but it's about the time when it should be affecting me, but I'm okay, take care of myself. But I worked at UNC for almost 8 years underground as a underground mine surveyor. I worked along behind the uranium miners, so what they were exposed, I got the same exposure, breathing in all the mine dust and diesel fuel dust, everything that they were exposed to. So I got the same dosage, and it was during one of those periods in April, or before, right around April, because the tailing spill happened in July. Excuse me, I'm getting my days mixed up, but the tailing spill happened in July 16, 1979. It was prior to that my supervisor at the mine, we went over to the mill site, which is only about less than half a mile, and the only thing that separates the mine site and the mill site of United Nuclear Corporation, UNC, is a hill, a rock outcrop. And so we drove, examined the tailings pond with there were several other people milling around, a lot of people from the New Mexico State Environment Department. I assume that's what they were. I noticed some large cracks in these and on top of the dams. We walked around, and I kind of stayed to myself. And later on, we went back to the mine, to the office, and it was there. I don't know. I don't remember how long after that. But I was working that day that the dam broke, and that afternoon when I was driving home, I passed the area, and it was the same location where I seen those huge cracks. And but so that released over 94 million gallons of tailings water, contaminated through the Perco Wash. And that Perco Wash also abuts my grazing area on the east side and on the south side. So I'm encircled in contamination all my life. And the UNC mine is about maybe 6 miles north of where I live. And so that release, that water, that contamination was released through the Perco Wash, which flows right through the center of Gallup, New Mexico. And that contaminant, I understand, went all the way through, crossing to Arizona and into, I understand it reached even Winslow, Arizona, and reached the Little Colorado River. And so that happened, and so that the mine shut down in 1982 of April, and I lasted another year doing labor work at the mill site. I got transferred to the mill site for exactly another year, April of '83. And so, but after that, I got on a permanent employee with the U.S. government with the Indian Health Service, which I just recently, 3 years ago, I retired after 35 years with the Indian Health Service. But in between there, and like I said, in December of 1996 is when I joined INDOM, and they were focused on trying to get NRC to canceled the license that they issued to HRI to do ISL mining. And we weren't, yes, ma'am.
Oh, no, this is fantastic, but I think we're gonna have some time.
Okay. Well, I was looking for your notice, how many minutes, so I kept looking on the screen. I couldn't see anything. So I
Oh,
just, okay, well, I guess I had a lot of time, so I just kept going. Okay,
you're
all
fine.
right, well, all right, I'm off.
Thank you. And we'll be following up, and we're about to post, Larry has a really great pre-recorded post that shares his entire story, that if folks are more interested in hearing that, because I know we've got other panelists to hear from, we'll be sharing that so folks can get Larry's whole story, but we'll be checking back in with you, Larry. Mary, I would love to turn it over to you to hear how you found out about nuclear weapons in your community.
Well, I was a child of the Cold War. I grew up in Salt Lake City. I'm a lifelong resident, and like tens of thousands of other Americans, I grew up and lived under the clouds of fallout from nuclear testing. There were 928 bombs exploded in the desert of Nevada, downwind. And interestingly, when they decided to move testing to the continental US, they had a Navy officer who told a Navy meteorologist, and he said, don't do it in Nevada because all the winds in America blow westward. You need to do it, and they'll cover the whole country. You need to do it in the east. But of course, they didn't do it. It wasn't convenient. Well, the winds blew across the entire country like other people. I got cancer. I developed thyroid cancer in my 20s. My sister developed an autoimmune disease and ended up dying. I have another sister who had a rare stomach cancer. Before my older sister died, she and I started keeping a list of all the people in our childhood neighborhood, which is a 5-block area, who had died of cancer, had tumors, or autoimmune diseases. That list soon got up to 54 people, and we knew something had happened to us. We knew about the downwinders in southern Utah. We heard about sheep dying, we heard about people there dying, but we never thought that had anything to do with us. I'm a journalist. I was working for the daily newspaper. I was also writing for a paper that covered the Nevada test site. We monitored leaks because underground tests leaked sometimes as much as above ground tests. The mushroom clouds look the same. And I was interviewing someone, and she mentioned that thyroid cancer was common in people who were downwinders, and that it was especially common in people exposed as children, which I was. And I said, oh, I had thyroid cancer. And she said, when? And I told her, she said, did you drink milk? I said, well, of course, we all drink milk from the local dairy. And she said, I want to interview you. You're a downwinder. And I said, no, I did not grow up in St. George. I'm from Salt Lake. And she goes, it went everywhere. Do you think it stopped at borders? And she showed me this map. Can you see this map? This is a map that Richard Miller did. He wrote a book called Under the Clouds, The Decades of Nuclear Testing. And he based that on government data from the Atomic Energy Commission, the US Weather Service, and the National Defense Agency. That shows where above ground testing went. It blacked out Utah, much of the West, the Midwest. It went all the way to upstate New York and into Canada. Well, when I saw that map, that was the big wake up moment for me. And I became an activist. I had cancer, but now I thought I needed to help increase awareness of what this was doing. I started writing about it. I started speaking about it. I started helping organize hearings about it. A lot of this work is done by downwinders who are themselves sick. And I had one woman say to me, you have to do this, Mary, because you got better. The rest of us are too sick. And I was working with a man named Preston Truman who knew everything. He was a downwinder from southern Utah. But part of his mission was also to show how many people were affected and to help expand compensation, because it was never enough. It never covered enough states. And so I have been working with him on that. There is plenty of scientific evidence to show where that fallout went. The National Cancer Institute did a study in '97 that showed dose reconstructions for the entire country, county by county. And they concluded that every county in the continental US got some level of fallout from testing. And they predicted that up to 212,000 cases of thyroid cancer alone were related to fallout. And that's just one radioisotope, the I-131, that causes that. It doesn't look at everything else. More recently, there was a study out of the University of Arizona in 2019, and his name's Keith Meyer. He concluded that probably up to 500,000 people died of fallout exposure from contaminated agriculture. Okay, now listen to this, mostly in the Midwest and in the Northeast. So that's some of the latest data. I have pages and pages full of studies showing that we got it, and that our government knew from the very beginning how far fallout went and what it was doing to the people like me, like my sister, like my neighbors. One really hard thing about this work is that the vast majority of downwinders don't even know they were, and they never will know they were. A lot of times there's this latency period from exposure to when you're diagnosed. That can be 10, 15, 20, 40 years. And I was talking to an epidemiologist the other day who said that cumulative exposure to radiation can manifest as cancer anytime during your lifetime, which means we haven't even seen them all yet. So, and that's the other thing I always try and impress with people. It went across this country, across the country. That also, we are still living with the effects of fallout. People are still getting sick. Their cancers are coming back, autoimmune diseases, health complications, and plus the genetic damage means another generation is going to get sick. So it's not just this story from our past that happened to a small area of southern Utah. It's far bigger than that. It's still incredibly relevant. And so that's been my mission. I ended up writing a play. I was working on a book and somehow ended up writing a play instead. That is a very personal story of me and my sister, and it's combined with all the information I've learned. I've just been working on this for so many years. And I tell you, it's hard work because I hear the most heartbreaking stories that are far, to me, sadder than mine. And a lot of the people I work with, and I worked with, every downwinder I worked closely with is dead. The last one died about 3 weeks ago. That was Preston, who I worked with from the beginning. And he had a second cancer he developed that took him. I was looking through my book of notes and found all this correspondence from him and realized we have been working to expand RECA since 2003. And in that time, so many people who would have been covered have died. And we used to say, they're just waiting for all of us to die. But across this nation are people who were the unwitting victims of an undeclared war. There's a woman who would always say, she wrote a book called Half Lies and Half Truths, and she said, nuclear testing did not prevent nuclear war. It was a nuclear war, and we are veterans of that war. So that's what my work is.
Mary, thank you so much. And I'm very sorry for your loss. And I know that the movement misses him as well. So thank you for taking time after that loss to share with us. I appreciate it. Last but not least, to tell us kind of about how he learned and his experience with nuclear weapons activity, I will turn it over to Keith.
Hi, thank you for putting this meeting together, and thank you for the attendees that have shown interest in this subject. My name is, as mentioned earlier, my name is Keith Kiefer, and I happen to have the honor of being the National Commander of the National Association of Atomic Veterans. The acronym is NAV, N-A-A-V. My story of how nuclear has affected me is I was asked to, when I was in the service, I wound up receiving orders to go over to Inuiatuk Atoll in the South Pacific. Now, Inuiatuk Atoll has some significant history behind it, not only World War II, but also in the nuclear legacy. Inuitak Atoll was part of the South Pacific Proving Grounds. And on Inuitak Atoll itself, there were 43 atomic bombs dropped. The mission I was sent over for was titled the Inuitak Atoll Radiological Cleanup Project. And the mission was the islands were too radioactive for the Marshallese to return back to their native land. And the mission was to reclaim the islands to make the islands safe enough for the islanders to return. I had been told that I would not see or receive any more radiation than you would see walking the streets of New York or Colorado, or wearing a watch with a radium dial. The Inuitak Atoll cleanup project was either the worst planned operation or the best planned operation for plausible deniability. They never, in my particular case, they never bothered to do any kind of a baseline testing, sperm count, urinalysis, blood work before going over or after coming back. I never had any protective equipment, nor did they issue me a radiation badge the entire time I was there. Some of the guys wound up having rubber booties. Some of them at various times may have had some masks. They weren't even N95 masks, but they'd be more like painters' dust masks that they might wear. Some of them did have some radiation badges because of the high heat and humidity. They were essentially worthless in terms of recording the radiation exposure. And on top of that, they would only measure radiation gamma and X-ray. They wouldn't measure any exposure to alpha or beta particles. Nor would they take into account the radiation that you would receive from inhalation or from contaminated food or water. Our water supply, as it turns out, I learned after the fact, what came from ocean water. Well, I knew our water supply came from ocean water. I didn't know that the snorkels, there was 2 snorkels for the desalination plants, and they were in close proximity to known dump sites in the lagoon for radioactive material. I ended up coming back and had a number of different health issues. I would have muscle aches, fevers that would come and go unexplained, that the doctors could never understand or figure out what was going on with it. Even though my wife and I did not use any birth control methods, my wife wasn't getting pregnant, and that's when I learned that I was technically sterile. That was the first indication that we started tying things together, that my time there may be contributing to some of my health issues. And I'll preface this as many health issues as I have, I feel blessed and compared to many other fellow veterans that were there. The particular operation took place between 1977 to 1980. It consisted of a total of a little over 8,000 individuals. Of that, a little over 4,000 of the veterans were involved with it. It was mainly Army, some Navy, and some Air Force personnel. I continued to wind up have a number of other issues. The next problem I encountered was a thyroid problem. Interesting enough, when it comes to radiation exposure, the most sensitive organs in your body is your reproductive organs. Second most sensitive organ in your body is the thyroid. I went on to develop a number of different autoimmune diseases, also problems with my bones, and also have, even though I have never been treated for cancer, nor do I have diabetes, I have peripheral neuropathy, which is, again, another disease which is linked to radiation exposure. It's generally linked to both radiation exposure and having diabetes. Many of my veterans have had fellow veterans have had numerous cancers. One of them that we lost here about 2 years ago ended up having 6 unique cancers. And of the approximate 4,000 veterans, we can only find about 300 alive. And the average age of the individuals that were involved with this operation right now would be in their mid 60s. So even though we were over there, the VA and DITRA, which stands for the Defense Threat Reduction Agency, still to this day denies that we were ever exposed to enough radiation to cause any health issues. Even though 60 Minutes did a special in March of 1980 called Remember Inuitak, and that was after we had completed our mission. That was the first indication that I had that our mission failed. Even after 3 years of scraping topsoil and transporting over to Ruined Island, which is part of the atoll, and depositing that contaminated soil and other materials into a crater, which was 33 feet deep and 350 feet in diameter. It was approximately 110 cubic yards of contaminated soil and materials that we deposited in there. And then we put a 18-inch thick cap on top of that was made from contaminated soil and Portland and cement. If you go on Google and you blow it up and you look at the various islands, you can actually see the dome from on top of Google Maps. It looks like a saucer on one of the islands, one of the northern islands.
Keith, I
Yes.
think it also bears mentioning, interestingly, just like there's no record or claiming of the fact that that you were exposed to radiation. The US government also doesn't take responsibility for the Runit Dome anymore. And so the Marshallese are left with that. But Keith, I want to give you a chance to talk a little bit more after. And of course, if folks have questions for Keith, I just want to be cognizant of time. Again, I think I said this off the top. These stories are unfortunately very rich. And I wish we didn't have to share them. And I wish this wasn't the reality. But I want to have time to kind of, we've heard about the history and we've heard how each of your lives and your communities has been touched by the nuclear system and by nuclear weapons activities, and how you have or possibly have not been able to get recompense for that. So my next question, and a little bit of background for our audience, you might have heard the term RECA thrown out a few times. And so RECA stands for the Radiation Exposure Compensation Act. And while most of the stories that we've just heard took place well before the 90s, RECA was introduced in 1990, and it currently entitles some people who were exposed to radiation through nuclear weapons activities to compensation, but as we just heard, not everyone is covered, nor has the recognition that they can and should have. Or it's very difficult to obtain funds, even if you are technically covered. So a question to the panelists, just quickly, before we kind of get into some nitty-gritty of how we can really dig in and help with this, but I'm curious, and some of you touched on this before, does your community have access to RECA or another form of compensation? And then regardless, how could the government better be supporting your communities? So this time, Larry, do you want to take that?
Yes, okay. Currently, there was a committee or a group of people that was set up with the Navajo Nation, and as far as I know, because I'm more involved with the with MACE, Multicultural Alliance for a Safe Environment, and there's a made up of 5 core groups, and one of them is post71.org, post71 committee out of grants, and we've been. So this group is not affiliated with the tribal committee. I'm not sure they have any, but I think it's because of the what's going on nowadays with the COVID and all the issues with that. Trying to get that committee together to meet, I think, is very impossible for them, because I got a call just recently, about a couple of weeks ago, from one of the members with that group, and they were. It seems like they were not too sure what was going on. Their lobbyists that was hired by the Navajo Nation government. The contract was not renewed, from what I understood, but but with the group under MACE, I'm like I said, I'm more involved with that group, with the committee there, under the direction of Linda Evers. We've been making contacts with Congress, with our elected officials, since the but I think I'm going to turn this over to Susan Gordon, because she's more aware. She's been really been more in communication with the committee, and also I believe with the congressman, and I don't know with the Navajo Nation DC office. So if I can turn it over to Susan. But as far as I know, the Navajo the tribal government at this time is stalled, as far as I know.
Thanks, Larry. And I think it's important to, people have probably heard how seriously impacted Navajo Nation has been through this COVID epidemic. And I think that there are a lot of reasons. A lot of, well, at least a third of the households on Navajo Nation do not have running water. And I think that it's important for people to understand that this is the United States, right? And yet there's still a significant indigenous population that do not have access to the basic things that we all take, for granted: running water, electricity, internet. Larry has only in the past couple of months gotten access to the internet, and because he's had to pay for it himself, it's not available. And I think that the vast, those issues on Navajo Nation impact people's health. And also your exposure to uranium impacts your health. And I think that that's really contributed to why so many people have gotten sick and have died on Navajo Nation, through this pandemic. So one of the things to understand about the Radiation Exposure Compensation Act, RECA, is that when it was set up, it provided provided compensation for some downwinder communities that were identified. And Mary had mentioned, now I'm totally spacing the community, Mary, but you'll say it again. What is it?
Probably you're thinking Washington County in southern Utah.
Right. Yeah, so there's one area in Utah that received compensation early on. No communities in New Mexico received compensation. And then there's a few others. But as Mary said, and we put a link up to the Cancer Center's study, you can look at those maps there and see that the fallout went all the way across the United States. So people in New York City, in New York State, there are some counties that had extreme fallout, particularly in the breadbasket. And there's lots of stories that are really fascinating about tracking all of that. So some counties were covered, and the uranium workers were covered, but only if you worked in the mines up to 1971. And the reason that they had this very artificial cutoff date is because the federal government bought all the uranium from the mines up to 1971. And after 1971, the uranium was then available for the commercial nuclear power industry. And so the thinking was that under general workers' compensation, that these workers would be able to, be taken care of if there was a problem. But the reality is that nothing changed in the mines. They weren't given any more protective gear. I mean, I've talked to miners who were, drinking water at the bottom of these mines, not knowing the radon that was released in the tunnels, and that the water was contaminated. So Larry is an example of somebody who was in the mine for 10 years. He wasn't officially a miner per se because he was a surveyor, and he is not eligible for compensation because he worked in the mine after 1971. So that's a key piece of why we need to change the Radiation Exposure Compensation Act. And I've been working on this for a really long time. We, as has Mary, and MACE decided, Multicultural Alliance for Safe Environment decided to push on a national campaign about 4 years ago now. And we were working with Earthworks. We were able to generate 14,000 emails into Congress. We've sent in 10,000 postcards to the chairs of the Judiciary Committee in both the House and the Senate, because that's where the amendments have gone every year, and they just sit there. They don't go any further. So I'm a little bit hopeful, despite 20 years of, I describe myself as an optimistic pessimist. So I think that, RECA is scheduled to sunset next year. So that means that this program is likely to go away by the end of 2022, which would be, I guess the year would end in July. So we're up against it right now. And we have a new administration. We have the Senate finally. And I think that there's some really positive opportunities for us. There was a hearing 2 summers ago that was attended by Senator Booker from New Jersey and Senator Kamala Harris. And they were both very, very interested in RECA. They remain interested in RECA, and it's likely that we'll have Senator Booker as one of our champions this year. So I think that there are new pathways for us to begin to look at how to, make sure RECA doesn't go away, make sure it's amended. I personally am working towards, I think we just need to throw out the amendments and write a new one. Like, why waste time with something that's already flawed, that doesn't include the Marshall Islanders? I mean, Keith, you know, his story, there 8,000 worker men, you know, they're not eligible under the current RICA legislation. And I think we need to rewrite it to make sure that the people that really need compensation and help get covered.
Thank you so much, Susan. I completely agree with you. It is absolutely criminal that people have been exposed and told they weren't and kept in the dark about this. And I know for me, talking with all of you ahead of this has really been an education for me and brought somebody like myself who cared about this kind of existential threat of nuclear war, but hadn't really given thought to, as Mary said, these unwitting participants in that. And so thank you. I completely agree. And I believe that we have shared in the chat Beyond the Bomb, we have a pledge. So if you are equally moved by these stories, we are collecting names of people who are interested and we will plug you in as movement happens on RICA. We want to make sure that we are mobilizing everyone we can for this push. So if you're interested in getting more involved, please sign up. But we will also be hearing from our panelists in a bit about how you can plug in with the work that they're doing on the ground. Keith, do you want to talk a little bit about RICA and veterans?
Yes, I've had the pleasure of working with a number of veterans and also family members of veterans at being able to get RICA compensation. Now, unlike the VA, if you meet the requirements of RICA, they're much less bureaucratic and much more efficient than the VA is, in that my experience is generally once you put the application in, if you've supplied the appropriate information, you get an answer within 6 months of whether you qualify or not, and a check sometime within six months to 6 to 12 months. In the veterans side that qualify under RICA, the Inuit cleanup veterans don't qualify for it under the current RICA that's going to sunset on July of 2020. But they receive a one-time payment of $75,000. Now, the bills that we had submitted here last few years increased the number of the payments from 75,000 to 150,000 retroactive, and at least the Senate version of it included the Inuit cleanup veterans, but unfortunately they didn't get it in the 115th session of the House bill, and then they dropped the ball again and didn't get it in under 116th. I'm hopeful that when they introduce it, the House version in the 117th, that it includes the Inuit cleanup veterans. Often this $75,000 is the difference between many of the veterans winding up becoming homeless, because the health issues have put them in a situation that they are unable to work, or if they are able to work, they're not able to work in the same capacity they would if they had good health. So far in the 117th session, the only bills related to RICA that have been introduced is HR 612, which I haven't been able to get a copy of that to find out if that's the same as HR 3783 from the 116th session. And then there's also a downwinders bill that is a limited coverage under RICA, or expansion of coverage under RICA. That's HR 538. So if anybody wants to go out and help support that, we're hoping to get a more expansive bill that covers more downwinders, covers the cleanup veterans, and expands some of the compensation introduced here in this 117th session. Depending on how familiar you are with the legislative session is if a particular bill does not make it out of committee and does not get a vote before the end of the session, you essentially have to start all over. You have to, again, find a author and co-sponsors to sponsor the bill in the new session. And because we just started a new session, we're starting all over from ground zero. We've lost some of our supporters through the election, and hopefully we're going to gain some also with the current makeup. But again, I'm very positive, very encouraged that the 117th session is going to be the session that we're going to get this passed in some way, shape, or form. There's a number of other groups like the Palomar veterans, which were also part of a cleanup operation in Spain, in which 2 nuclear bombs dropped and scattered plutonium all over the area. Those particular veterans don't have any coverage either under the VA or RECA. So I don't know if we'll be able to get them included in RECA or not. But again, we're trying to get some coverage for that particular veteran group. Any other questions or things you want filled in? The best thing the individuals can do if they want to support this is, first of all, call your 2 state senators and ask them to support any of the RECA bills, and make sure they know it's Radiation Exposure Compensation Act, or it goes under the name of downwinders. And also your congressman. Then you can branch out from that and find out which particular senators or congressmen are on the Judiciary Committee and encourage them to have a hearing on the bill. I've had the pleasure of providing testimony for these particular bills on 3 occasions now.
Thank you, Keith. I really appreciate that. And you all are doing a great job of preempting me on what people can do. So thank you. You know your stuff inside and out. And again, we are collecting names, and if you're interested, we will plug you in with these folks. And I'm sure if they want to share their contact information, they can do so in the chat so you can connect directly. But we'll be monitoring this pretty closely at Beyond the Bomb. But Mary, I would love to turn it over to you.
Right. Okay, I have to really say such a relief that Beyond the Bomb is pushing for this too. And Susan, your work that I didn't know about, it's just so heartwarming to me to see that people are pushing for this, because sometimes it seems like such lonely work. And I'm so glad to know about what everyone else is doing. We've been pushing here. There are 2 bills. Keith kind of mentioned them. Senate Bill 947 and House Bill 3783. And those would expand compensation to all of Utah. Right now it's just Southern Utah. To all of Nevada. Right now it's just a little corner of Nevada. And to all of Arizona, which right now it's just a little sliver of Arizona. So all of Utah, all of Arizona, all of Nevada, all of Colorado, Idaho, Montana, New Mexico, and it would also expand it to Guam and the Mariana Islands. One thing too, RECA was just, I mean, it's for, if you're a civilian downwinder, it's 50,000, which doesn't even cover 1 chemo treatment. So this would raise it to 150,000 for civilian downwinders. Also, the downwinders from Trinity were never included in RECA. So this changes the dates, because there's a very specific set of dates. You have to prove you lived in one of these places. And it changes it to 1945 so that it would cover Trinity downwinders. But as RECA stands, there are certain time periods you have to have lived in those areas. There are certain cancers you have to have had. You know, there are like, I think it's multiple myeloma, lymphoma, pharynx, small intestine, salivary gland, brain, stomach, bladder, colon, thyroid, pancreas, breast, male and female, esophagus, bile ducts, gallbladder, liver, lung, ovary. So it's 18 kinds of cancer, and leukemia. And you have to have your medical records. And so it's kind of, I know it's maybe easier than getting it from some places, but it's hard for people to always fill out those forms. Like I was a child when it happened. So how do I prove I lived there? I don't have mortgage bills. I don't have utility bills. I didn't necessarily keep all my medical records. And if you're part of the Navajo Nation, you know, you also don't have the proof. So you have to prove those things. You have to submit it to the Justice Department, which handles RICA. So RICA, and you touched on this a little too, Susan, that about the reasons it was never more inclusive. When I look at it, that first fight actually wanted more areas covered, and they had to kind of compromise. It ended up covering largely rural areas. It didn't cover more populated areas, which I always just considered it was very political, those boundaries. Because if you look at the lines in some of the states of what counties are covered and what aren't, it's like, oh, Fallout suddenly stopped at this county border. It didn't go over the river. So it's never really made sense. And I feel like we are running out of town. I mean, it does run out in 2022, so it needs to be extended and expanded. And again, so many of the people affected are not going to be with us anymore. Although families can't apply for it when a loved one dies. But I just think it's a matter of justice, and we've waited too long, and we know our government is culpable. We know they lied to us. We know they endangered us. And I just think they have to do right. They just have to do right by all the people they harmed.
Thank you, Mary. And thank you everyone for, again, sharing this and bringing this issue today. I'd like to move us into opening this to questions from the audience, because I would love to get some interplay there. And actually, Mary, to your point, the first question that we have submitted in the Q&A, and attendees, please feel free to utilize the Q&A function. We'll try and get through as many questions as we can. And if we can't, perhaps our panelists would feel free to comment offline, but we can see how many we get. But the first question that I see here is why aren't many people aware of downwinders? And Mary, if you want to take that, or if others want to opine on it, I'm happy to.
It's not included in history books. It's not taught. I think a lot of times too, if people have heard of them, they just assume it was this little area in Utah that didn't really matter, and that it was long ago and it's not relevant. I think it's been so hard to get the message out to the public of how far it went and how many downwinders there likely are. I don't think it's in the government's interest to let people know how far it went, even though they kept maps of where the jet stream carried every single test at different levels. So it was never in their interest. And I just think a lot of people think it's an old story. I remember talking to, I'm just going to say it, Ira Glass was in town to do his show. And I went up to him afterwards with a woman who'd written a book about it and said, you should really do This American Life on Downwinders. And he just looked at us and said, well, that's old stuff. Who cares? And that was really hard to hear. It is just really hard to get that word out. And a lot of people will say, well, there's always been a lot of cancer. How can you prove it? The proof's been a hard thing, although there are multiple studies now. You can never absolutely 100% prove one thing causing one specific cancer, but when the correlation is so high, it would be pretty rare for that to be accidental. So I think that's why RICA is presumptive. It presumes that if you grew up in or lived in certain areas during certain times and got certain cancers, you likely can blame fallout. So that may be one reason. If you have ideas for how we let people know, let us know.
Can I weigh in here just a minute on a little bit of a parallel story?
Yeah, please.
Downwinders are not unlike the atomic veterans. Generally, when I talk about atomic veterans, I get the deer in the headlights. Nobody knows about what they are. The atomic veterans ended up, they were under oath of secrecy until 1996, that they could not talk with anybody about their experiences without fear of being jailed or having civil fines leveled against them. That includes their doctors and their family members. So often, I still run into today many of the veterans that still think they're under oath of secrecy, but that was lifted in 1996. And again, that is not widely known about the oath of secrecy, nor that it was lifted. So the government's done a very good job about keeping a lid on this.
I would jump in here with a little anecdote as well. So there's a community outside of Cincinnati, Ohio, that was involved in refining the uranium ore. So once you dig up the uranium from the ground, it has to be processed in a couple of ways before it is used to develop a nuclear weapon. And so this particular plant, it's called the Fernald Feed Materials Plant. It was also under the secrecy. And so all the people that work there were not allowed to say what it was that they did. And so the way the government was able to get away with it is that there was a huge water tower, you know, those ones that are up on stilts. They painted it in checkerboard, the red and white checkerboard that was the symbol for the Purina animal food. And so it was called the Fernald Feed Plant, and everyone just assumed that they were making animal feed. And nobody talked about it because of the secrecy that Keith is mentioning. So that's just a little example of how the secrecy was able to, you know, be perpetuated everywhere. It's still, they still call Los Alamos here in New Mexico the secret city. It's just, they got away with murder.
Yeah, that reminds me of another thing. I think it was the US Health Department was sworn to secrecy about the effects of fallout up until like 84. So they weren't even allowed to tell the public what it was really doing. Secrecy and denial have been huge with our government when it comes to things nuclear. Yeah.
Thank you so much. We're getting some awesome questions here. First, I want to share that Jean Stevens, I'm not sure if this is a question, so please let me know if there's one in there, but we have another downwinder from the Los Alamos National Lab who's here with us. So thank you for tuning in, and if you have a story that you want to share and you want us to get out, like, let us know in the chat, reach out to me. Again, this is something that is, unfortunately, as we've heard, rather new to me, but I'm very keen to uplift folks' stories. So if you are a downwinder and want to share, let me know. But in the chat, Jean also has a question too. Plutonium detection question. I'm assuming that's in the chat. Is it the do bomb manufacture workers, bomb decommissioning? No.
No, that one's in the Q&A.
Ah. Am I missing this?
I'm not sure why you can't see that. Jean, if you'd like to turn on your microphone, you can go ahead and ask our panelists that question. If not, I can read it off. Let me go ahead and give you that option. Oh, perhaps not. Maybe. There we go.
Is Jean able to speak, or do you want me? This is Susan. I could go ahead and do this.
Here, Jean, you should have the option to speak now if you'd like to.
Okay.
Perfect.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
I'm in the dark. I wasn't expecting to be on. So I live about 45 miles downwind from Los Alamos National Laboratory. And you all know about the billions and billions of dollars going into the modernization. We don't know what's going to happen, but it doesn't look good. So they've just rented 10,000 square feet in Santa Fe to have an annex in Santa Fe. So my question is, I've lived in Taos for over 30 years, and I was there for the Cerro Grande and the Las Conchas fire, which both came within about 3 miles of the lab proper. And so the smoke that came into Taos because of the highest mountain in the state, it just hung there in the valley. Now, they did put Geiger counter at the local hospital and in other parts of the downwind area, but I was told through Greg Mello that plutonium is not detected through the Geiger counter. So this is a big issue with plutonium pit production and what happened at Rocky Flats in Colorado, which was closed down by the FBI in '89. I've also heard that Denver is one of the most radioactive places outside of Chernobyl area. So if you could comment on that, I would most appreciate it.
Okay, so I think the Los Alamos Study Group, which is based out of Albuquerque, New Mexico, is a really good resource for more information about that. Los Alamos has had releases, intentional releases, as have some of the other nuclear weapons production sites like Hanford, where they released clouds of contamination to see how far it would go, what the impact would be on the animals and the people in the area. There are a lot of really evil things that were done in the name of, you know, US nuclear weapons production. I mean, it's just, there are so many stories that could be shared about all of this. I did want to, I'll put in a couple of more resources in the chat for folks. There's a group based out of, now I can't even remember where they're from, Brazil. And they have been doing Uranium Film Festival for the last 10 years, I think. And their website is just uraniumfilmfestival.org. And you can go to their site and they have lists of hundreds of films that are about the fallout, about uranium. It's not just uranium, about nuclear weapons development. There's an excellent one about the Marshallese and the atoll and the big storage unit that's there. So that would be a good resource for you. And then I saw another question that was about our workers at Los Alamos and other nuclear weapons production facilities covered under RECA. And the answer is no, they are not. There is a separate program called the Energy Employees Occupational Illness Compensation Program Act, which is an acronym that is impossible to pronounce. And that is how those workers receive compensation. So they do indeed wear badges that track their exposures. At this point in the nuclear weapons complex, they're doing a much better job of protecting workers. And so like, that's a good thing. And they do get a better compensation package than the RECA, cohort of downwinders and uranium workers. So I can put both of those links in the chat. And then I also previously added another health study that's been ongoing here on Navajo Nation, which is the Navajo birth cohort. And that's a really fascinating study that is looks at, they're doing those bioassays, so taking blood samples, et cetera, and looking at the impacts to babies, but also the parents, and looking at things like Keith, mentioned being sterile and the long-term impacts of multi-generational exposure to uranium on Navajo Nation.
Thank you. I want to take a question that was answered by folks in text form, but this is going out as a recording as well. And I think it's a great question that I would love to have answered on air. So from Julia Hardy, the question is, how would retroactive compensation, deceased persons, etc., under RICA work? And how do you combat the argument that it's too late to expand coverage back to the 40s? I saw Keith, if you want to kind of give an expanded answer, would appreciate it.
The flow is somewhat similar to like a will. Let's take an instance of say that it's a veteran, male veteran husband. If he is no longer, if he was exposed, meets the qualifications, and is no longer with us, then the compensation would flow to his wife if she filed it on behalf of the husband. If neither the wife or husband are alive, then it would pass on to the biological children. And in that case, all the biological children would have to apply for it. And if you have, just for example, 4 children, then the $75,000 in the case for a veteran would be divided 25% to each of the children. So as far as the 40s question, I'll let somebody else address that question.
Okay, I don't think it's too late. There are still some downwinders who were very young children when they were exposed, as well as Keith mentioned, their children can apply if they have died. So if a child fills out all the paperwork, and of course they'd probably be adults now, they would get the compensation. So I don't think it's too late. And it's also important because it's a recognition that there were downwinders in Los Alamos.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I will put in one more request for questions. If there's anyone who's been sitting on one, now would be the time to ask it. Well, in the meantime, and while we wrap up, I just want to thank each of you for taking time tonight. I know that, again, as somebody who this is not my lived experience, this is a heavy topic, and it's, I think, only made heavier by being in strange pandemic quarantine times where we might be separated from loved ones, and having to be with all of this is hard and heavy. So thank you for your time tonight, and thank you to all of our attendees. I will say just one more time that at Beyond the Bomb, this is something that we are adopting into our work and will become a critical cornerstone, because we can't just be looking at this existential threat of nuclear war. We really must be looking at the human consequences that have played out and make sure that there is justice across the board for all of that. So thank you so much to everyone. If you have any lingering questions for our panelists, I'm happy to pass those along. You can email us at Beyond the Bomb and we'll be happy to pass those along. And if you're interested in getting involved in any of the organizations that any of our panelists are with and represent, please let me know and we can connect you there as well. And Susan, thank you for posting all of your resources in the chat. We'll be sure with this recording, we'll be sending out all of the resources that were posted in the chat. And if panelists think of any on the back end, we're also happy to send that out. So thank you so much, everyone. Have a great night.